Hey everybody, my name is Spaz and I'm a CD junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I will be discussing one of my favorite vocalists of all time, Mr. Andy Williams. Now, Andy Williams is the artist that I own the most CDs by, and you are going to experience that firsthand in just a matter of moments. But first, like every other episode of CD Junkie, I like to explain how I got into the artist. And growing up in the 60s, of course, my parents would play the radio. They'd have the TV on, so we'd see the Andy Williams TV specials or maybe his appearances on different television shows. And then my mom, in 68 or 69, used to play this album quite a bit, the Born Free album by Andy Williams. Of course, I loved it because I loved the song Born Free at the time. Originally, Born Free was a hit for Matt Monro in the UK. Andy had the hit over here in the US. And it's a lovely song, of course. But the other song I was really attracted to on this album was Music to Watch Girls By. Of course, I wasn't, I didn't care. I was 5 or 6 years old. I didn't care about, girls had cooties. But I loved the song. So this is how I got introduced to Andy Williams. So now I'm going to show you my Andy Williams collection. And because I have so many, I'm only going to show you the covers. I'm not going to show you the back, and I'm not going to really address each of the albums, but I will tell you little tidbits about some of them. But we're going to start off with a CD called 8 Classic Albums. And what this does is it combines the albums he recorded in the 50s for the Cadence Records label. So this features a total of 8 albums. 7 of them are regular studio albums, which are Andy Williams Sings Steve Allen, Sings Rodgers and Hammerstein, Two-Time Winners, To You Sweetheart Aloha, Lonely Street, The Village of St. Bernadette, and Under Paris Skies. The other album included in the set is a self-titled album called Andy Williams, which gathered together some singles and such. But that right there is a nice introduction to his Cadence collection because it features all of it. This CD here features 2 of those albums. I prefer these twofers, so I'm eventually going to find the other ones on twofer so I can own those. But this has the self-titled and Sings Steve Allen albums on it. After Cadence, he signed with Columbia and was with Columbia from, I think, about 62 to about 1980. So we're going to start with his first 2 albums for Columbia. And these 2 albums, here's a little tidbit about Moon River. Are you aware that Moon River was never a single? Moon River is Andy Williams' signature song, and it was never a single. It was only an album track, yet it remains his most popular recording. Now, these next CDs aren't exactly in chronological order because sometimes these twofers would either be from the UK or the US, and they might put an album from 63 and an album from 64 together. But generally speaking, you're going to be able to look at his entire catalog. In the early days of Columbia, Andy was known to record mostly like Broadway show tunes, American Songbook standards, things that a lot of the other artists would be recording. Yet his voice, so pure, so honest. When Andy sang, you knew when he really connected with the song because you can feel it in the recording. But he is actually probably right up there with Elvis in terms of overall favorite vocalists. And just an exceptional, very expressive vocalist that really deserves a second listen, third listen. You really need to delve into his catalog if you haven't already. But what you'll notice is some of these do contain some of the same albums. Like this one here was on another disc, but that's, again, because they're UK and US 2 CD collections. By the time the mid-60s rolled around, Andy was sort of moving away from just doing show tunes and American Songbook type things. He was actually starting to record the hits of the day and mixing those in. And, you'd find hits by, let's say, Simon and Garfunkel and the Beatles and things like that on his albums. And it wasn't until the late 60s that that's really what he was exclusively doing. And oh my goodness, here's that Born Free album that I told you about. The first album that I really loved by Andy Williams. So now we're getting into the days when he would be recording pop hits of the day. So he was actually recording even things like I Need You by America, and his version is just outstanding. I love America's version, but I really prefer Andy Williams' version over that. This release here features a quote-unquote soundtrack from his TV show, The Andy Williams Show. It's kind of annoying because they're actual studio versions of the songs with audience dubbed onto it. The beginning and the ends, which really annoys me because the studio versions are fantastic. He does a version of Make It With You by Bread. He does a version of Mike Nesmith's Joanne. Really outstanding stuff. Up through the 70s, which is what we're into now, he's just an amazing vocalist. He does a version of Three Dog Night's Pieces of April, which is just stunning because he has this amazing voice and he does these backing vocals which just make it so haunting and beautiful. And again, I apologize that I'm not really naming out the albums here. You can pause it if you want to see, but you'll probably stumble across a lot of these albums in used bins, and I'd highly recommend anything from the late 60s through the 70s. This was actually a 1980 album. That was his last album for Columbia. Now, that's the end of those twofers. Here's the final twofer. Beat Goes On Records in the UK, and they took over reissuing the Andy Williams catalog. And now that the twofers are over, now why don't we talk about the 2 CD sets that contain 4 albums? Now, these are closer to chronological order. Now, you're going to say, but SPAZ, I saw those albums on the twofers. Yes, you did. But what you have to understand is there's a lot of these things. The UK versions of the albums were slightly different. But sometimes they had different album titles. Sometimes they had different track listings, like the track listings were all messed up. But I can guarantee you also that buried in some of these UK editions of the albums, they actually feature alternate versions of some of the songs. Pieces of April, which I mentioned a little while ago, the version on the UK album is completely different than the version on the US album. There's another track called This Is My Song. The US version has a horribly edited version that just makes me cringe, but the UK version is a different mix without the edit that ruins the American version. So obviously I want to have both versions in my collection because being a collector and loving everything that Andy Williams does, I am very proud to continue collecting Andy Williams for as long as I can. And what this means is with all the CDs I'm showing you, I actually have every Andy Williams album that he released in his career spread over all of these discs. I think there's 43 albums in total. And this is the last 2 CD set I have. I think there might be one more of these out there, so I have to try to track it down. But those are on Beat Goes On. These are probably your best deal now because you're getting 4 albums on 2 discs. The interesting thing is this was his second to last album. Now, Andy, like I said, he was covering a lot of pop hits during the late 60s and early 70s. This album here was unique because apart from the song Since I Fell For You, none of the songs on the album are kind of vaguely familiar. So this was Andy sort of approaching it as an Andy Williams album, not relying on hits of others and doing things his way and recording the albums that he wanted to record. This album here was his last, as I showed you a little while ago. That was more of a country themed album. A lot of his albums did have themes to them. And I'm not going deep into it because I have so many here. I'd love for you to get on the internet and do some research on Andy Williams because it's really a fantastic artist. Like I said, that voice. But here is that same album I was showing you just a few moments ago. This is a version with 8 bonus tracks. This is a version that came out domestically. Again, this is an album filled with tracks that are mostly unknown and mostly unique to this album. But Andy didn't record an album until the late 80s, and then he came out with this one, which, if you're an Andy Williams fan like me, you want it in your collection, but it's kind of schlocky, late 80s, Fender Rhodes piano type recordings. a little bit too soft, a little bit too faceless. His voice isn't as strong. He can't hold out the notes like he could before, but it's still worthwhile addition to your collection. And he recorded an album in the 90s, I believe, maybe 94, that was a country-tinged album, which is the only thing that I have been unable to find on CD. I think it was on Curb Records, so you'd think it would be easy because all those Curb Records end up in the budget bins. Now, in 2006, he recorded a new album called I Don't Remember Ever Growing Up. This is the UK version that came out in 2007. Again, he stuck with his guns, and he did sort of pop hits of the day, maybe since the last time he had recorded an album up to that point. So it has The Police's Every Breath You Take. It has She's the One, which World Party did, but then Robbie Williams made a hit. And it has a lot of basically 80s and 90s and the millennial hits as well. So it's a very interesting collection. You can look at the tracks there. His voice, again, he was in his late 70s, wasn't as strong as it was in the early days, but it's very, very Andy Williams and still sounds wonderful. But here's something here. The album, actually, this version came out in 2007. Now, I knew that he had put it out independently in 2006, but I was never able to find a copy. So I get a Facebook message one day from my friend Les Abrahamson, and he says, "Hey, do you need this?" And he shows me a picture that he took with his phone of this album, but the American version. Well, there was a little note attached to the front that said that it was autographed by Andy Williams. So I immediately said, please grab that. So thanks to Les Abrahamson, I now own Andy Williams' autograph on the original version of I Don't Remember Ever Growing Up. I now own Andy Williams' autograph on a CD, which is just a absolute joy to have. So thank you very much, Les, for picking that up for me. I really appreciate it. And that's it for my Andy Williams studio CDs. But as you could tell, there's still a little bit of time left on this video because I'm going to show you some of the compilations I have as well. This is a standard one that everybody should own, Andy Williams' Greatest Hits. It's short, sweet, and to the point. Has his biggest hits, including Happy Heart. I mean, Happy Heart is probably one of my favorite Andy Williams songs. And everybody, of course, loves his Christmas recordings. This CD here collects all his Christmas recordings for Columbia Records and puts them on 2 CDs. So you have them all there, and you can cuddle with those and snuggle with those. And then there is also, I have a 3 CD Reader's Digest collection. I don't believe that there's anything extremely rare on this, but it's a Reader's Digest Andy Williams collection, so of course I want to own it. And then this is a real treat to own. This is B-Sides and Rarities, and that was coming out when all those American twofers were coming out. Lots of rare tracks that you can't find anywhere else right there. And finally, the last 2 Andy Williams CDs that I want to discuss are probably the most popular in terms of compilations that some of my friends might own. I Think I Love the 70s, which is, as the title suggests, some of his recordings from the 70s, including I Think I Love You by the Partridge Family, Candida, and there's a great song on here. It's called Who Was It? That is a Gilbert O'Sullivan song, but he makes it his own, and it is fantastic. And then finally, In the Lounge with Andy Williams. This is a very popular CD because I just love the selection of songs. So anyway, that is it for this episode of CD Junkie. I want to remind you, please continue to buy physical product. Because you know what? Andy Williams would want you to buy physical product. I want you to buy physical product. Keep your local record store alive. Keep the labels alive. Keep the memory of Andy Williams alive. I appreciate you sitting through my Andy Williams collection with me. I hope that maybe that inspires you to go out and buy some Andy Williams, or at least listen to some Andy Williams. Go into a used shop and buy vinyl. Go into a new store and buy a compilation. Go online and buy something. Go and research Andy Williams, because he really was one of our finest vocalists, and he is so overlooked these days. So anyway, I do appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And until the next time, my name is SPAZ, and I'm a CD junkie.